Hey everyone, welcome back to Strange Minds 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we are going to be reading more of Chicken Soup for the Dog Lover's Soul, stories of canine companionship, comedy, and courage, written by multiple authors such as Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, Marty Becker, DVM, Carol Klein, Amy D. Shoja, and many more. But before we begin reading, I would like to ask if you guys can please hit that like button and hit that subscribe button if you haven't subscribed already. It would mean a great deal to me if you did. But without further ado, my dear friends, we're going to get right into it. So grab a snack, grab a drink, or sit back and relax. And let's get to this. My furry Muse. Newlyweds always face challenges as they learn what to expect from each other. My Iranian husband, Mahmoud, came from a country, culture, and especially a family very different from the close-knit, pet-loving household I'd experienced. But we had faith our love was enough to build a life together. In November 1979, our world blew up. We struggled to understand the taking of hostages half a world away, and we worried about Mahmoud's relatives caught in the insanity of that awful nightmare. The crisis threatened our relationship as well. We were so very different. The stress became unbearable. Sometimes we hurt each other, expecting too much. We'd misunderstand a word, a glance, a gesture that had different meanings for each of us. Would our love survive? So when Mahmoud suggested a puppy for my birthday, the gift meant everything. In his homeland, dogs were considered dirty, dangerous creatures suitable only for outdoor guard duty. Inviting a dog into our home meant he understood me, that he wanted me to be happy, and that he knew what would help me most during the most frightening and challenging time of our lives. The German Shepherd puppy kept me company when Mahmoud worked nights. Fafnir listened when I worried out loud, clowned to make me laugh, and licked away my tears. And when there were many tears, I felt out of place in the small eastern Kentucky town where we lived and missed my distant Indiana home and family. I struggled to be a perfect wife and of course failed miserably, but Fafnir made me feel important. He didn't care if meals never tasted like Mom used to make. He never called me a Yankee, and we seemed to have a common language that needed no words. He thought I was wonderful, and I knew he was special too. Then Mahmoud was laid off, so we moved to Louisville, where he attended graduate school. Less than a week after the move, I found a position as a veterinarian assistant near our apartment. As a special bonus, I could take Fafnir with me to work. Our neighbor's small cockapoo, Fidget, became best friends with Fafnir. Things were looking up. Then Fafnir developed a limp. He favored just one paw and then another. Medicine temporarily relieved his limping, but his paws turned red, itchy, and swollen. He scratched constantly and only seemed happy when playing tag with Fidget. I tried everything. Antibiotics made him sick. A special diet didn't help, and his weight dropped £59. Despite my discount, the treatment costs added up and up. Nothing seemed to help. Fafnir was allergic to the air he breathed, the molds, pollens, and other allergens of the Ohio Valley region. His condition grew worse day by day. Fafnir no longer looked like a German shepherd. When I stroked his black coat, his fur pulled out in clumps, with flaky skin still attached. His once expressive ears were naked on the outside, the tender inside lined with pustules and slow-to-heal scabs. Constant licking and chewing stained his tummy black, except where the red oozing sores broke the skin. Swollen feet prompted a halting, limping gait, more appropriate to an aged, arthritic canine. When he visited the clinic with me, pet owners now shrank away and pulled their dogs out of sniffing range. They didn't want Fafnir to give his horrible disease to their beloved pets. Although he wasn't contagious, I couldn't blame people for their concern. Fidget still invited games, but Fafnir could no longer play. He hurt too much, and he smelled. He was only 14 months old. Had love blinded my eyes and my logic? If this poor creature belonged to somebody else, would I also shrink from touching the affectionate dog? How could I justify continued treatment? Was there a better, more compassionate option? No, not my Fafnir. I veered away from the thought before it fully formed, but a calmer, more reasonable voice insisted that I face the facts and realities of the dog's condition. Was I being selfish? Would death be the kindest treatment of all? I couldn't bother Mahmoud with the question. He had enough to worry about. 2 days. 2 days and nights. I argued with myself. One moment, sure, any life was better than an early separation from my beloved dog. The next, trying to find strength within myself to stop his suffering. The third morning, driving the short distance to work, it was hard to see the street through my tear-clouded eyes. Fafnir licked my neck, excited, as always, to visit the clinic and see his friends. Maybe he'd get to sniff a cat. Oh, doggy joy. The busy morning moved quickly, from case to case, while Fafnir rested in his usual kennel. Each time I dug into my pocket for suture scissors or pen and touched the crumpled paper, my eyes filled again. It was the euthanization authorization form I decided to complete during lunch break after playing with Fafnir one last time. Then an emergency case arrived. A young woman, nearly hysterical with fear, carried a Pomeranian puppy into the clinic. "It's Foxy. Please help. He chewed through an electric cord." The woman's 2 small children watched with wide, tearful eyes. The veterinarian began immediate treatment. A transfusion would help, since the pup's in shock. Luckily we have Fafnir here as a donor. I froze. For an endless moment I couldn't breathe. Then without a word, I brought my boy out of the kennel. His eyes lit up at the chance to sniff Foxy's small, shivering body. Fafnir's scaly, bald tail wagged, and he grinned. I had to coax him away to draw 12 cubic centimeters of precious blood from his foreleg to give to this tiny, new little friend of his. By lunchtime, Foxy's gums transformed from white to healthy pink, and he breathed normally. The red puppy even managed a feeble wag and sniff back when Fafnir nosed him through the kennel bars. For the first time in 3 days, I could smile through what had become happy tears. Without looking at it, I pulled the euthanization paperwork from my pocket, crumpled it, and tossed it into the trash. What if I'd made the decision an hour earlier? If Fafnir hadn't been there for Foxy, the puppy would have died. Fafnir grinned up at me, and I realized he didn't care how he looked. Fafnir patiently put up with the unknowns in his world, with uncomfortable baths, bitter pills, and scary needle sticks he couldn't control, simply because he loved me and trusted that I would keep him safe. Fafnir willingly came to Foxy's rescue, just as he'd rescued me during the first troubled months of my marriage. That's what we do for our friends, for the ones we love. We pass it on to strangers too, simply because it brings such joy. 6 months later, Mahmoud attained his master's degree, found a job, and we moved from Louisville to Tennessee, away from the allergens that had plagued him. Fafnir quickly recovered and no longer needed medication. My heart swelled with quiet thanks during each afternoon walk when neighbors admired Fafnir's proud stride and glowing coat and begged to pet him. In Tennessee, I began to write about my experiences working at the vet's office. My first published article told Fafnir's story and launched my pet writing career. Fafnir has been my furry muse ever since. More than that, his infectious grin, his quiet trust, and his delight at meeting new critters, Licky a cat, fill the pages of my heart with a joy beyond words. Amy D. Shoja. The next story is called After Dooley. On my wife's 50th birthday, we were awakened in the middle of the night by the violent shaking of our bed. Dooley, our 18-year-old miniature dachshund, lay between us, jerking in convulsions. He was so fevered that I could feel the heat without actually touching him. We rushed him to an all-night animal hospital and waited for the inevitable heartbreak. He did not die that night, but his old and tired body had taken more than it was meant to tolerate. A few days later, with a powerful tranquilizer running through his veins, our dog fell asleep for the last time as I held him in my arms. Dooley was a puppy when my wife Patricia and her 2 sons received him as a gift. 5 years would pass before I came into their lives. Growing up, I always had pets, but Patricia had never considered herself a dog person. In fact, Dooley had been her first. Other dogs made her very nervous, so after Dooley passed, when I suggested that we consider bringing another canine into our home, she said she would go along with the idea only if I accepted certain conditions. First, we wouldn't rush into anything. Our loss was still very fresh in our minds, even after several weeks of mourning, and we were both concerned that replacing Dooley too soon might somehow disrespect his memory. Second, we would consider only a puppy, since an older dog might be more aggressive and therefore more difficult for my wife to handle. Finally, our new dog would and could not weigh more than 10 to 15 pounds when fully grown. We decided to start our search in late March, around the time of our wedding anniversary. That way, if we found a dog we liked, we could purchase him or her as a mutual gift. Still, I knew that Patricia was doing this more for me than herself. On our first visit to the local animal shelter, I saw him immediately. As soon as the door to the back room opened, we were greeted by a chorus of 30 to 40 barkers, wildly competing for our attention. The cages stood side by side and facing each other, forming a U around the cool, semi-dark room. He was there in the first cage. To the right, a full-grown lab mix calmly taking in the cacophony around him. Black as night, he nearly blended into the dimly lit recess beyond narrow steel bars. I caught his eye and quickly looked away without a word to my wife. Too old and too big, he did not match our predetermined profile. After a short tour and a cursory examination of the younger residents, my wife and I left the shelter empty-handed, but promising to come back soon. More than a week had passed when we arrived home from work to find a vaguely familiar voice recorded on our answering machine. "Where have you been?" were the first few words we heard. The message was from Vicky, the animal shelter manager, urging us to come and check out some recent arrivals. The next evening, we went back to the animal shelter for another visit. But again, our search for the perfect puppy came up empty. As we were about to leave, I noticed the dog I had admired the previous week, still watching us hopefully and with quiet dignity from that first cage on the right. I stopped and turned to my wife. I was certain of the reaction I was about to receive, but like a child who cannot help asking for one thing he knows he can never have, I took a shot. "How about this guy?" I said. A few minutes later, Patricia and I were alone in a quiet room across the hall. I could hardly believe it when she had agreed to take a closer look at a dog 4 times the size of Dooley. Now, I could sense her apprehension as we sat there on a pair of folding chairs waiting to meet the orphaned animal. I was certain I would never get him. The door opened, and in popped a furry black head. He hesitated in the doorway, clearly assessing the situation. He looked at me, then at my wife. As if he knew which of us he had to win over, he walked straight up to Patricia and gently placed that beautiful head in her lap. Amazed, I watched my wife instantly fall in love. I will never forget the look of compassion on her face or the conviction in her voice when she turned to me and said, "I want this dog." Exley was now and has now been a part of our family for just over 4 years. I'm still dumbfounded at the thought that this gentle, loyal, and loving animal was once abandoned to the streets. Likewise, I'm surprised that someone else didn't come along to adopt him. In the days between our first and second trips to the shelter, maybe we just got lucky, or maybe there was something else behind our good fortune. My wife is certain that we had some help She believes Dooley's spirit was with us that night, nudging the bigger dog in her direction and somehow finding a way to let us know that he was the ideal new companion for us. Yeah, right, I tell her, not bothering to hide my skepticism. Believe whatever you like if it makes you feel better. But sometimes when I find myself on the couch enjoying a few peaceful moments with Exley, listening to his soft breathing and feeling his warm body pressed as close as he can against my leg, I remember our visits to the shelter and how I nearly passed by this wonderful dog without speaking out. In those moments of contented companionship, so like the times I spent with Dooley, doesn't seem at all far-fetched that the spirit of an old friend might find a way to help his surviving family pick out the perfect new friend. Gary Ingram. And that is where we are going to leave it, my dear friends. Please tune in next video. And the next story that we would be reading for the next video is called When Harry Met Kachi. This has been Ruby, signing off.